According to official reports, in the summer of 1996, we caught and relocated a huge and aggressive grizzly. But that turned out to be a lie. That night, we really did catch something, but it was not a bear. And the fact that I am writing this almost 30 years later, with shaking hands, should tell you everything you need to know about what really happened at Shoshone Lake. My name is Arthur Keene. In the 90s, I was a ranger in Yellowstone. I was not a rookie. By 1996, I had been walking these trails for almost 10 years. I knew the sounds, the smells, and the rhythms of this place. I could tell the difference between a branch snapping under a deer's hoof and a bear's footsteps. I thought I had seen everything this park had to offer, from majestic bison herds to elusive mountain lions. But July of that year changed everything. It all started small, as it usually does. A pair of tourists camping on the south shore of Shoshone Lake radioed in that they had been woken in the middle of the night by screams. They could not describe them. It was not the roar of an animal, nor a human cry for help. It was something in between, a long, agonized wail that, in their words, made their blood run cold. At dawn, they packed up and left, without looking back. We attributed the sound to a mountain lion. Sometimes they make sounds similar to a woman's scream. It was a simple and logical explanation. A week later, another call came in. A family camped a little farther east reported that their campsite had been ransacked. Not just turned upside down, but ransacked. Their heavy-duty bear-proof cooler had not just been opened, it had been torn apart, the metal crumpled like foil. The tent was ripped to shreds, and the heavy cast iron grill they had left by the fire had been thrown 6 meters into the bushes. The strangest thing was that the food was left almost untouched. A grizzly would have eaten every last crumb, but this one, it just destroyed everything. And again, no tracks. The ground there was hard and rocky, but my partner Jim, who was the best tracker I knew, searched the whole area and did not find a single clear bear paw print, only dents and scratches that could have been anything. In the report we wrote, atypical bear behavior and increased patrols. Management was not pleased. A wrecked campsite is bad publicity for the park. I volunteered to patrol the area myself. I felt uneasy. The tourists' stories, the trashed camp, none of it fit the usual picture. I set out on a 2-day patrol, alone. I preferred working alone because the silence helped me hear the forest better. On the first day, nothing unusual happened. The usual sounds, the usual smells. I set up camp by a small stream, a few miles from the lake. The night passed quietly, but the next morning everything changed. As I was walking along the trail through dense pine forest, I felt it. First came the silence, the kind of oppressive silence when the birds and squirrels go still. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. That is always a sure sign that a large predator is nearby. Just in case, I took my .30 caliber rifle off my shoulder. Then I caught the smell. A heavy, musky smell of wet fur, rotting leaves, something sharp and unfamiliar. It was not the smell of a bear. It was something else. Sharper, almost animal. It hung in the still air and seemed to tickle my throat. I moved forward slowly, against the wind, trying to step as quietly as possible. The tracks led me to a small clearing with tall grass, and there I saw footprints that froze me in place. These were not bear tracks, and not human ones either. They were enormous, 1.5 feet long, 5 toes, a wide heel, a pronounced arch, just like a human's, only twice the size and pressed deeper into the ground. I crouched down, afraid even to breathe. The creature that left these tracks must have weighed at least 800 pounds, judging by the depth of the prints in the compact soil. I followed them with my eyes. The trail of footprints crossed the clearing and disappeared into the brush on the other side. I took out my camera and snapped a few photos, even though my hands were shaking. I followed the tracks for a few more meters. The stride was enormous, at least 2 meters. None of the animals I knew moved like that. I felt a chill run down my spine. All the tourist stories, all the inconsistencies in the reports, it all suddenly made horrifying, tangible sense. I did not go any farther. Something inside me was screaming that I should not. That same day, I went back to the station without finishing my patrol. I showed the photographs to my supervisor, Dale Hargrove, a pragmatist to the bone, a man who believed only in what could be measured and documented. He looked for a long time, first at the photographs, then at me. There was nothing on his face but exhaustion. "What do you think this is, Arthur?" he asked quietly. I did not know what to say. "It's not a bear, Dale." He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I know," he said. "Tourists keep calling. Another camp was destroyed last night. This time someone saw a figure in the woods. They say it was huge." We sat in silence for a few minutes. The air in his office felt stifling and heavy. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Put together a team," he said to someone on the other end of the line. "We are going to catch a problem grizzly. Yes, a very large one. Prepare the biggest cage we have and a double dose of tranquilizer." He hung up and looked at me. In his eyes, I saw something I had never seen there before. Fear. "We're going to tell everyone it's a bear," he said firmly. "And whatever we catch, Arthur, it will be a bear. Do you understand me?" I nodded, although the cold in my chest had turned into a block of ice. We were preparing to catch a bear, but deep down I knew we were hunting something else, and I had no idea what we would do if we succeeded. The plan was set in motion with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency that always made me a little uneasy. Dale did not waste time on guesses or theories. He acted at once. An hour after our conversation, 3 more rangers arrived at the station. Jim, Mark, and Bill. They were all veterans, men who had spent more time in these woods than in their own homes. Dale gathered us in the conference room. A topographic map of the Shoshone Lake area lay on the table. He circled the very clearing where I had found the tracks with a red marker. His briefing was brief and to the point. Official objective: capture and relocate a man-eating grizzly displaying atypical aggression and posing a threat to park visitors. He repeated this 3 times, looking each of us in the eye. We all nodded silently. We had all seen the photographs I had taken. We all knew we were not going to be hunting a bear. Preparations took the rest of the day. We were issued the largest and sturdiest trap the Park Service had at its disposal. It was less a trap than a mobile cage made of hardened steel, 10 by 10 by 15 feet. It had been used for transporting rhinos to zoos and for moving the largest elk. Thick steel bars were stacked across it, and the door was a massive steel plate an inch thick, held in place by a powerful lifting mechanism. The trigger mechanism was reliable and simple. A taut wire attached to the bait. The slightest tension caused the half-ton plate to come crashing down to the ground. This device was transported on a special truck with a winch. Watching it being loaded, I felt as though we were preparing for war. Besides the cage, our gear included 2 powerful tranquilizer guns. Dale personally briefed us on the dosage. "Load the maximum dose of carfentanil," he said in a quiet, even voice. "Enough to take down a bull elephant." We don't know what kind of metabolism we're dealing with. Only fire once it's securely locked in. No risks. Each of us also had service rifles and pistols. We set out late in the afternoon to reach the site and get everything ready under cover of darkness. The drive was slow and grueling. The truck struggled to squeeze along the narrow access road. The cab was silent, broken only by the roar of the diesel engine and the creak of the suspension. Jim sat at the wheel, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had not said a word since we left the station. He had seen the tracks with his own eyes, and that was enough. By the time we finally arrived, the sun was already beginning to set behind the pine tops, painting the sky in shades of blood orange. The air was still and heavy. The silence I had noticed there that morning had returned, even more oppressive than before. Unloading and setting up the cage took almost 2 hours. The clang of metal on metal, the creak of the winch, these sounds seemed sacrilegious in this frozen forest. We set up the cage at the edge of the clearing, camouflaging it with spruce branches, leaving only the dark mouth of the entrance open. As bait, we used the carcass of a young deer that had been hit on the highway earlier that day. Jim insisted on adding several wild plants with juicy tubers to the meat. "If it's that big, it must be omnivorous," he muttered, arranging the bait. "It needs a lot of calories, not just meat. We strung the trigger wire, tying it to the deer's hind leg. Now any movement of the carcass would trip the mechanism. Once we finished setting up, we moved 100 yards deeper into the forest, to a small rocky ledge that offered a good view of the clearing. We settled in there, spreading a tarp on the cold ground. Darkness fell quickly. Nights in Yellowstone in July can be deceptively cold. The cold seeped through our clothes, but it was not just about the temperature. It was the cold of waiting, the cold of uncertainty. We sat in complete silence, communicating only by gestures. We had night vision goggles, old army models that gave a grainy, ghostly green image. Through them, the world looked unreal, like a nightmare. The hours dragged by slowly, minute by minute. All we could hear was our own breathing and the quiet rustle of wind in the treetops. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound felt strangely comforting, a reminder of the familiar, understandable world. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed movement. Something large and dark emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. It was not a bear. Bears move clumsily on all fours. This creature was walking on 2 legs. It moved slowly, with incredible smoothness for its size. It was enormous. Even at a distance of 100 yards, through the grainy optics, I could tell its height exceeded 8, maybe 9 feet. Broad shoulders, long, powerful arms hanging almost to its knees. Its entire body was covered in thick, dark fur that, in the green light of the night vision goggles, looked almost black. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, as if breathing in the air. It made no sound. It just stood there, motionless, like an ancient statue. I felt my entire body go rigid. I held my breath. Beside me, Bill quietly cursed, and I heard the click of the safety on his rifle. Jim put a hand on Bill's shoulder, and Bill froze. The creature took a step into the clearing, then another. It moved with remarkable caution. It did not go straight for the bait. Instead, it began circling the cage in a wide arc, keeping its distance. It was studying it. I watched its massive head turn from side to side. There was no doubt about it. It was intelligent, but it was not human intelligence. It was a primitive, animal caution, honed by thousands of years of survival. It completed a full circle and stopped again, now directly in front of the cage entrance. The smell of the carcass must have been strong. It took another step, then another, and now stood at the entrance. It leaned forward, and for a moment its silhouette blocked the doorway, becoming a solid black mass. Then it reached out its incredibly long arm and touched the deer carcass. It did not yank or pull. It just nudged it slightly. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible click of the taut wire. And then the world exploded with sound. The deafening, grinding roar of the falling steel plate echoed through the night forest, making the ground tremble beneath our feet. For a split second, absolute silence fell. Then a roar erupted from the cage. It was not the roar of a bear, nor the scream of a mountain lion. It was a sound of primal rage and pain, a sound that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth, a deep guttural cry that turned into a piercing wail, full of such hatred that my hair stood on end. The bars of the cage shuddered from a monstrous blow from inside. Then came another, and another. It seemed as if the whole forest shook from this primal fury. We sat frozen on the ledge in horror, staring into the darkness at the trembling cage and listening to the cries of a creature that was not supposed to exist. We had caught it, and now we had to face what was inside. The roar coming from the cage was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It rolled through the forest like a shockwave. You could feel it physically. It made the air vibrate in my lungs. Birds that had dared to return to their nests shot screeching into the night sky. The first roar was followed by a second, and then a deafening crash. The entire 15-ton steel structure shuddered, and I heard the metal grind as it shifted several inches across the ground. Then another crash, and another. Dull, powerful blows that seemed to shake the trees, as if someone inside the cage were methodically pounding the walls with a car. Dale's voice crackled in my earpiece, sharp and tense. "Keen, report! What's happening?" I swallowed, trying to wet my dry throat. "We caught it, Dale. It's in the cage." My voice sounded strange, strangled. It's trying to get out, I added, completely unnecessarily. The sounds coming from the clearing spoke for themselves. "Everyone, hold your positions," Dale ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. "Do not approach the cage. I repeat, no one approaches the cage until dawn. Maintain visual contact through the night vision devices and report any changes." His order was logical. Approaching an enraged creature capable of shifting a steel cage in the dark would have been suicide. But that meant we would have to spend the rest of the night listening to this hellish concert. The next few hours were the longest of my life. The furious attacks on the cage bars continued with terrifying regularity. We heard not only blows, but also scraping, as if it were trying to bend or break the steel bars with its bare hands. From time to time, the roaring gave way to a low, guttural growl, so full of malice that it sent shivers down my spine. We sat on the ledge, not daring to move, and just listened. No one spoke. What was there to say? We looked at each other in the dark, and in the grainy green light of the night vision, I saw on my comrades' faces what was probably on mine, a mix of awe-struck horror and complete disbelief. We were experienced rangers. We had dealt with bears, mountain lions, and bison herds. We were men not afraid of the wilderness, but whatever was sitting in that cage down below was not part of the wilderness we knew. By morning, the sounds began to die down. The furious outbursts gave way to long periods of silence, broken only occasionally by a dull thud or heavy, ragged breathing that was audible even from our distance. It seemed as if the creature had run out of breath. When the first grey rays of dawn began to filter through the thick pine canopy, complete silence settled over the cage. That silence was almost as eerie as the roaring had been. "Arthur, Jim, ready the tranquilizers." Dale's voice came over the earpiece. "Mark, Bill, cover them. Move slowly. No sudden movements." We climbed down from the ledge. Our legs were numb from sitting so long on the cold ground. The air was frosty and smelled of ozone and pine needles. When we reached the edge of the clearing, we saw the scale of the destruction. The ground around the cage was churned up. Deep furrows in the soil showed how far the cage had shifted from its original spot, a distance of at least 10 feet. Several young trees nearby had been broken and uprooted. We began to approach. 4 men, moving as one, weapons ready, step by step. My heart was pounding in my chest like a bird in a cage. When we got within 50 feet, I was able to make it out clearly for the first time. It was sitting in the far corner of the cage, hunched down, its back to us. Even in that position, it was enormous. A massive, muscular back covered in thick, matted, dark brown, almost black fur. The fur was covered in mud, pine needles, and leaves. Long, powerful arms wrapped around its knees. It was not moving. "Maybe it's dead," Bill whispered. "Heart attack or something." No one answered him. We moved closer, and I walked around the side of the cage to look inside, and then I saw its face. In that moment, my world turned upside down. It was not an animal, and it was not a human. The face was covered in shorter fur, and the skin beneath it was dark, almost black, wrinkled and weathered. Deeply set eyes beneath massive brow ridges stared straight ahead into emptiness. The nose was broad and flat, like a gorilla's, but the mouth and jaw were more human-like, only far more massive. It slowly turned its head toward me, and our eyes met. I will never forget that look. There was nothing in its eyes but primal, pure hatred. It was not a predator's malice, nor a hunted animal's fear. It was the conscious, intelligent hatred of a creature that found itself trapped and knew exactly who was to blame. Its gaze betrayed intelligence, but an ancient intelligence, wild and utterly alien to humans. Suddenly, without warning, it lunged at the bars. The movement was so fast and explosive that we all jumped back. It did not roar, it simply struck both paws against the steel bars with such force that the entire cage shook. One of the bars, as thick as my arm, visibly bent. A low, menacing growl tore from its mouth. "Shoot! Now!" Dale shouted. I raised my rifle. 2 muffled thuds sounded. my shot, and Jim's. 2 darts with bright orange feathers pierced the massive muscle of its shoulder. It roared, but this time from pain, and pulled one of the darts out with its enormous paw, as if it were a simple splinter. It looked at the dart, then back at us. It was still standing, swaying, its breathing heavy and ragged. It took another step toward the bars, but its legs gave out. It sank to its knees, then slowly fell onto its side. Its eyes were still open, and stared at us with that same all-consuming hatred until the eyelids closed. We stood there, breathing hard, looking at the fallen creature. Adrenaline was still surging through our veins. We had done it. We had caught the impossible. I took a step toward the cage to get a better look, and at that moment, I heard a sound. It was not a sound of the forest. It was the roar of approaching engines on the access road. A few seconds later, 2 vehicles emerged from behind the trees. These were not Park Service pickups. They were large black SUVs, completely clean, with no license plates or any identifying marks. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, and people got out of them. There were about 6 of them, all dressed in identical dark clothing with no insignia. They did not look like soldiers or police. They moved in sync and in silence, and each had a holster on his hip. One of them, a grey-haired man in a formal suit, completely out of place in the forest, walked up to Dale. He did not even glance at the cage. He looked straight at Dale and said, in a voice that left no room for argument, "We're taking this. Your job here is done, Ranger Hargrove." Dale Hargrove was not a man who gave up easily. He had worked 25 years for the National Park Service, and Yellowstone was his territory. He took a step forward, placing himself between the grey-haired man and the rest of us. "I don't know who you are," Dale said in a quiet voice, hard as granite, "but this is a Park Service operation. This creature is our responsibility. I demand to see your identification." The man in the suit did not even blink. He looked at Dale with an expression of bored superiority, as if regarding an annoying insect. He did not reach for a badge. Instead, he took a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to Dale. It was not a warrant or an ID, just a single sheet of paper with an official look and a seal at the top that I could not make out. Dale unfolded it. I was standing close enough to see his face change as he read it. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving an ashen pallor. His shoulders, which until that moment had been straight and confident, sagged. He slowly raised his eyes from the paper to the man's face. In his eyes was something I never expected to see there: defeat, complete and unconditional. He silently folded the paper and handed it back. "Understood," he croaked. The man in the suit took the document without saying a word and nodded to his people. That was enough. They went into action with cold, polished efficiency. 2 of them, armed with automatic carbines we could only dream of, broke off from the group and formed a perimeter, standing with their backs to us and facing the forest. They were not looking at us. They were looking through the trees, as if expecting someone or something to emerge from the brush. The other 4 headed to their truck. Their equipment was simply out of this world. They wheeled a heavy platform on wheels out of the truck bed, then unrolled something that looked like a huge tarp, made of thick rubberized material. No one gave orders. Everyone knew their place, their movements. They worked in complete silence, their actions coordinated like a surgical team. The woman, the only one in their group, walked up to the cage with a metal case in her hands. She opened it. Inside, in neat foam cutouts, lay not a veterinarian's field tools, but gleaming surgical instruments and glass vials. She put on gloves, took a large syringe, and drew a clear liquid into it. Then, with remarkable composure, she reached her arm through the bars and gave the animal an injection in its massive neck muscle. It did not even flinch, being under deep sedation. Then she took another instrument to collect blood and tissue samples. We stood and watched as strangers took over our land, our catch, and there was nothing we could do about it. We were merely spectators. When they finished the medical procedures, they covered the cage with a heavy tarp, completely hiding the animal from our view. Then, using a silent electric winch mounted on their truck, they began hoisting the cage onto the platform. The whole process took no more than 15 minutes. Not a single wasted movement, not a single wasted word. Once the cage was securely fastened, the grey-haired man approached us again. He had a folder in his hands. "Your reports," he said flatly. He handed Dale 4 copies, already printed. I glanced over Dale's shoulder. The report stated that we had tracked, captured, and sedated a giant male grizzly bear showing signs of rabies. It listed the exact time, location, equipment used, and tranquilizer dosage. All of it was a lie, but a flawlessly documented lie. At the end of the report, it stated that, due to abnormal behavior and a potential biological threat, the bear's carcass had been handed over to a specialized federal team for further study and disposal. "You will sign all of this," the man continued, "and then you will sign a non-disclosure agreement. It states that you will never, under any circumstances, discuss what you believe you saw today. Not with family, not with friends, not with the press, with no one. As far as everyone, as far as the whole world is concerned, it was a bear." He took out a pen. "Any violation of this agreement will be considered an act of treason. Am I clear?" His gaze swept over each of us, lingering for a moment. There was no threat in his eyes, only a statement of fact, a cold, ruthless certainty that this was how it would be. We signed, one by one, on the hood of one of their SUVs. Jim's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. When the last of us had signed, the man took the documents without even checking them. "Your involvement in this incident is officially over. Return to your posts. Forget about this day." With those words, he turned and got into the SUV. A minute later, the convoy of 2 black SUVs and the truck, carrying our catch away to an unknown destination, disappeared behind the trees. We were left alone in the clearing. The rising sun illuminated the traces of their activity: deep tire tracks, broken branches, and churned up earth around the spot where the cage had stood. A faint but distinct musky smell of the creature still lingered in the air. All the evidence was there, but now we were bound by silence, sealed with our own signatures. Dale stood motionless for several minutes, staring at the empty clearing. Then he picked up the copy of our fake report that had been left with us. He crumpled it in his fist, but then slowly smoothed it out and folded it neatly. "Let's go," was all he said. The ride back to the station passed in silence. Each of us was lost in his own thoughts. The horror of the encounter with the creature began to fade, replaced by a new, colder, and more haunting fear. Fear of people who erase reality so easily and effortlessly. I sat looking out the window at the trees rushing past, but all I could see was the creature's eyes in the cage, eyes full of hatred. And I realized the most terrifying thing. We had not just caught a Bigfoot. We had handed it over to people who knew of its existence and, judging by everything, had known about it for a very long time. And we had just helped them keep their filthy secret.